Chapter 8. His Social Teaching, a Dimension of the Monastic Life. St. Gregory Palamas lived as a monk, indeed as a hesychist monk, from his childhood to his falling asleep in glory. What we've looked at thus far has presented him as a great ascetic of the Holy Mountain, as we meet such ascetics today in the garden of the Panagia. He knew very well the inner struggle, the devil's warfare, his methods, the subtle passions which exist in fallen man, and also the way to cure them. Only a person who has acquired inner experience of this struggle can know all these subtle activities which go on in the inner world, how the common energies of the soul and body function unnaturally, naturally, and supranaturally. And all of this is essential here in order for us to explain his social teaching as a dimension of the monastic life. Therefore, everything that has gone before must be kept in mind in all that follows. In this chapter, we shall try to look at his social teaching along with a number of topics related to it. Concretely, we shall find out, first, that St. Gregory dealt with all the burning questions of his time. He is usually presented as a great theologian who spoke about the distinction between the essence and energy of God, about noetic prayer, about the return of the nous to the heart from its dispersion. But along with these themes, mainly while he was Metropolitan of Thessaloniki, he was also engaged with social problems. In reading his homilies, we find that he confronted the problems which were occupying the minds of the people, his flock, but he did this within the theology of the Church. Finally, we shall find that St. Gregory Palamas spoke on these subjects as a theologian and a Hagiorite hesychist. Secondly, we shall look at St. Gregory's relations with the zealots of Thessaloniki, who did not accept him as bishop of the city directly after his election. And of course, we shall also look at the whole phenomenon of zealotism in Thessaloniki in that period. Thirdly, we shall note that in all his activities, and especially in the face of the civil war which was going on at the time, St. Gregory acted as a genuine hesychist. He did not become involved in the political conflicts, but acted as a great father of the Church, always trying to reconcile the differing sides. This is necessary because, unfortunately, there are some who, moved by an anti-hesychist, Western spirit, and other ideological notions opposed to the Orthodox life, accuse St. Gregory Palamas of being motivated by aristocratic ideas because he was on the side of the Cantacuzene and of interfering in the political conflict in his time. And for that reason, the zealots of Thessaloniki did not accept him after his election. Moreover, not knowing the essence of Orthodox tradition, they spoke against it, demonstrated that they had a Western spirit. But finally, after careful research, it turns out that it was not hesychism which broke up the state, but the political conflicts and the anti-hesychistic trends. I think that all these things will become clearer in the analyses that follow. In studying this subject, St. Gregory Palamas as a Hagiorite, I could not avoid this side as well. Above all, I shall insist that St. Gregory always acted as a Hagiorite, and his social teaching was a fruit and outcome of the hesychistic life which he lived on the Holy Mountain. 1. Zealotism and zealots. Zealotism as a zeal for religious topics and for the Christian faith has existed at all times. There have always been isolated Christians who, having a zeal to keep the Christian faith, have gone to extremes. In Holy Scripture, the word zealot is used sometimes in a positive, sometimes in a negative sense. The Apostle Paul said to the Corinthians, quote, "Even so you, since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, let it be for the building up of the church that you seek to excel." 1 Corinthians 14, verse 12. The Christians should belong to a people who are zealous for good works. Quote, "Christ, who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself his own special people, zealous for good works." Titus 2:14. However, there are zealots who have zeal without spiritual knowledge, and as a result they become fanatics. The Apostle Paul, referring to the Israelites who were fighting against Christ, wrote, For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to spiritual knowledge. Romans 1:2. Moreover, he himself had personal experience of this matter when, with the zeal which he had before Christ appeared to him, he fought against him. He himself wrote, "For you have heard of my former conduct in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous for the traditions of my fathers." Quote, Galatians 1:13-14. So there's zeal according to spiritual knowledge and zeal not according to spiritual knowledge, which creates many problems in the name of faith and of God. There are two hallmarks of true Christian faith: zeal and love. When these two are joined together and walk together harmoniously, they constitute a genuine Christian. When they are separated and disjoined, then deviations from the true Christian faith are created. Love without godly zeal ends in dry moralism, and zeal without love leads to violent episodes. We find throughout the ages fusions of zealotism, in the sense of an anthropocentric view of things and the solving of various problems in violent and fanatical ways. It can be said that the chief hallmarks of zealotism are theocratic notions, abhorrence of political authority, and at the same time the abhorrence of ecclesiastical authority, when the latter is linked with the former, sympathy for the poor and oppressed classes, and violence. We must look particularly into the phenomenon of zealots and zealotism of the 14th century, which interests us here because the zealots of Thessaloniki did not accept St. Gregory Palamas when he moved to Thessaloniki to be enthroned after his consecration as bishop. 2. The zealots of Thessaloniki. But before we examine the phenomenon of the zealotism of Thessaloniki during the time of St. Gregory Palamas, we should say that at the same time we also encounter zealot excitements which ended up in uprisings in other parts of the Byzantine Empire for various reasons. For example, we must say that in the cities of Western Macedonia, which did not have a serious commercial element, the leaders were usually members of the aristocracy. Here, civil war was purely a dispute between the two sides of the aristocracy. However, in studying particularly the zealots of Thessaloniki in the 14th century, we see that this uprising, about which a great deal has been said, coincided with the political conflict between John Peliagos and John Cantacuzene, as well as with the conflict between the Hesychists and the anti-Hesychists. It is in fact a critical period for both the Byzantine state and the Church. It is critical for the Byzantine state because its life was ending, in decline, because various enemies such as Turks and Serbs were surrounding it, and critical for the Church because Western-minded so-called theologians were trying to put into the heart of Romanity the Western way of life and thought, abolishing Hesychism, which constitutes the orthodox and unalloyed theology of the Church, and which has been supporting Romanity all their lives. We must note that the zealots of Thessaloniki were a new element, alien to the traditional fabric of the city. We quote the following writing about the character of this new element. Quote, "Much has been written about the zealots, but little can be said with certainty. They definitely have to do with a stratum which separated from the rest of the population and had its own leader, Michael Peliagos, in the first place, in the first phase of the insurrection. Various converging reports also mention that a new element alien to the traditional fabric of Thessaloniki is involved here. Demetrius Saidonis mentions simply that new men took power who until then had not participated in the government of the city. Gregoras informs us that in 1343, when Thessaloniki was blockaded by Umur's fleet, and those who had flocks and fields lost them and were resentful, while the poor too were ill-disposed toward the rich, there appeared a new element, a mobbish troop, with no respect for the laws, calling themselves zealots, who summoned the people to a coalition against the rich. Patriarch Hierotheos, who came from Thessaloniki, mentions in his Life of St. Sabas the Younger that the initiators of the rebellion were not natives, but intruders and barbarians who had found refuge in Thessaloniki, having come from distant parts of the empire, come together from our borders, and from the neighboring islands. Indeed, they are presented not only as enemies of Cantacuzene, but also as apostates from the church, while another source asserts that in the opening phase of the rebellion the zealots made use of the cross on their flag. Finally, it is certain that the zealots of Thessaloniki had a close relationship with the sailors and others who were involved with the navy. These coastals, as Cantacuzene calls them, lived outside the city and were formed into a guild under the leadership after 1345 of Andrew Palaiologos. They were the armed coastals, and like the zealots were characterized as determined individuals and as the demagogues par excellence who mobilized the masses. Although the sailors were mentioned in parallel with the zealots, it must be supposed that these were in general two groups overlapping at a great depth. So it was a matter of men, most of whom had to do with the navy, which also means, in view of the facts of the 14th century, that they were occupied with trade and piracy. We must not lose sight of the fact that the Sailors' Guild had Andrew Palaiologos, a member of the aristocracy, as its leader. In most of the social revolutions of the 14th century, in Western Europe it was a common phenomenon for the leaders to be members of the merchant class or even of feudalism, but who, at the particular moment, were expressing demands or pursuits of the peasants or of the more oppressed strata of the city. Moreover, it is perfectly certain that Palaiologos, moderate at first, followed rather than laid out the policy of the rebellion. Its real instigators were the sailors and the zealots. It is usually said that the zealots of Thessaloniki staged a social rebellion and that it was a class struggle. This is not so, because the rebellion of the zealots of Thessaloniki was a single phase of a civil war. It is noted by a student of the subject, quote, "Certainly the zealots did not carry out any social rebellion there either, as is too often said. Their activity was one phase of the civil war between two political factions which wanted to seize the imperial throne." Nevertheless, during the development of zealotism, both social demands and claims were manifested. The zealot movement began from religious convictions, for most of its members were uneducated, fanatical monks. But it included many poor, beggars, and an odd assortment of people. With time, this religious faction developed into a political party with reformational and anti-monastic principles, while from its old religious complexion it preserved only the abhorrence of ownership. Refugees who came to Thessaloniki from the parts which the Serbs occupied joined the poor of the city and pressed the leaders of the zealots to take measures at the expense of the rich, which ended in common pillaging, as we shall see further on. So the zealot movement at first had a religious character, but later it changed into a political movement with principles of reform, and indeed this was revealed in the political conflict which broke out in the empire between the years of 1341 and 1347. In addition to these things, the zealots were supporters of decentralization and sought to adopt, quote, a kind of feudalistic system of governing. In the political conflict between the young John Palaiologos with his protectors, that is to say, the Queen Mother Anna Palaiologina, Admiral Alexius A, Patriarch John C, and Cantacuzene, the zealots of Thessaloniki, lined up on the side of the Palaiologi and against Cantacuzene. There were two reasons which made them take the side of the Palaiologi against Cantacuzene. The first was that they had an affection for the family of the Palaiologi, select members of which stayed in Thessaloniki at different times and governed the district. And the second was that Cantacuzene advocated reinforcing the central government, while they wanted administrative autonomy. We must take note of this second reason because it seems that Cantacuzene was the most representative type of political leader, rich, a warrior chief, erudite. Also, the Zealots were against Cantacuzene because he was associated with the support of the central authority of the state, while the local leaders were aligned on the side of decentralization and the application of a kind of feudalistic system of government, which moreover had been practiced sometimes wisely and sometimes in a crude way continually from the year 1204 onwards. Of course, it must be said that the Zealots were against St. Gregory Palamas, apart from other reasons, also because he was hesychist, an exponent of experiential hesychistic theology, while their interest was social and political, and because St. Gregory liked Cantacuzene as a supporter of hesychism. We shall examine this analytically later on, when we study the stand which St. Gregory took toward the political conflict and the civil war, as well as toward the Zealots of Thessaloniki. Likewise, in order to see the character of the movement of the Zealots, we must not overlook two additional aspects which, to my mind, are very important. The first, that the Zealots fostered a sympathy toward Rome, as did the old Studite monks. For this reason, they respected and sympathized with the Pelilogi, who were in favor of union. It is well known that John V. Pelilogos, having failed to lead the church to Rome, embraced the Latin dogma, while his mother Anna was of Franco-Latin lineage. I think that this is an extremely important element in showing us the whole character of the movement. The Zealots were inspired by Western concepts that were alien to the tradition of Romanity. The second side which must be emphasized is that the Zealots were favorably disposed toward the Serbs. It is characteristic that, quote, Andrew Pelilogos, who became their leader after the murder of Michael Pelilogos, when friends of Cantacuzene were prevailing in Thessaloniki, took refuge with Stephen Dusan and then on the Holy Mountain. Indeed, when in 1350 Cantacuzene appeared in Thessaloniki, he found Stephen Dusan besieging the city with a large army, while within the walls his zealot allies were ready to betray the city to him. These two latter elements, that the Zealots were in favor of union with the West and eager to surrender to the Serbs, show that in reality they were alien to the tradition of Romanity and that they had Western presuppositions. Precisely these two elements explain the stand which they took toward St. Gregory Palamas, since he was a bearer of Romanity. All these characteristics of the Zealots, the trend in favor of autonomy, social demands, sympathy toward the West, antipathy toward central authority, and basically toward Romanity, not to exclude personally repressed experiences as well, led them into vehement states and acts of violence which constitute the darkest elements in the history of Thessaloniki. In one phase of the civil war and of the action of the Zealots, during which things were being brought to a reconciliation of the inhabitants of Thessaloniki, some tragic events took place. This was in the middle of 1345. Let us look at how these events are described. Quote, "But in the meantime, Andrew Pelilogos, leader of the Sailors' Guild in the time of Cantacuzene, assembled the sailors, and all the zealots he could find, stopped near the sea gate and summoned the people with trumpets. The population of Thessaloniki did in fact take the side of the zealots, while the army, enclosed in the Acropolis, refused to fight against their fellow citizens. The people then threw fires into the gates of the Acropolis, and the zealots were able to enter. The next day, the zealots hung from the walls all of the rich people who were inside, and later they also blinded others who were hidden in the city. This act was the bloodiest and most radical of the civil war. It was a real overturning of the conditions that had been shaped in the Byzantine cities, and that for the first and last time the city lost almost the whole of its ruling class, and the authority was exerted by the men who represented the most common classes. Sidonis describes this upset with abhorrence, saying that a slave buys his master, the bondsman buys the man who has bought him. The rough country dweller buys the general, and the farmer buys the soldier. Unfortunately, we have no information about the governing of Thessaloniki in 1347 to 1349. We know that the city, isolated in Macedonia, which was ruled by Cantacuzene and the Serbs, from whom the Zealots had sought help, had no contact with Constantinople, and its government was independent. We also know that around the end of the 14th century its population was particularly hostile to the wealthy and to the aristocrats, which shows that the memory of the era of the Civil War had remained alive. The infuriated multitude butchered hundreds of nobles who had camped on the Acropolis, as they also butchered many nobles of the city who were in their homes. Among the few who escaped the slaughter were St. Nicholas Cabasilas, who was saved by a miracle when he hid in a well. Therefore, after his salvation, he wrote, quote, "A prayer to our Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God and Word, in which the Lord is hymned for his kindnesses to the human race, and entreats him that the civil wars, disturbances, torments, and the killings should stop." The sufferings of that day, in the middle of July of 1345, had reached such a pitch that, as Cantacuzene records, there was information that some people tasted human flesh. After that violent revolution, the Zealots governed Thessaloniki until 1350. This, as well as all the events which preceded, was significant for the subject which concerns us, because St. Gregory Palamas was chosen Metropolitan of Thessaloniki in that dramatic period in 1347. Cantacuzene had already been reconciled with John Palaiologos, but things in Thessaloniki were still inflamed. When Isidore, a friend of the Hesychists and of St. Gregory Palamas, became Patriarch of Constantinople, St. Gregory was chosen Archbishop of Thessaloniki in May of 1347, for in the meantime he had received strong demands and entreaties, quote, from his king, Cantacuzene, and indeed from the wonderful Patriarch. St. Hierotheos speaks in beautiful words about the selection of St. Gregory Palamas. Through his selection, the people of the Church received its famous old friend and protector, the demagogue and professor of the decrees of God. Thessaloniki, that famous and great bishop's seat, received the one who was worthy of it. St. Gregory, who had traveled to Thessaloniki to be enthroned, could not achieve his purpose. As we saw before, Thessaloniki was at that time being governed by the Zealots, who had taken the city after deeds of violence and slaughter. The Zealots, whose characteristics we have mentioned, did not accept St. Gregory, and he then went to the Holy Mountain. St. Hierotheos Kokkinos says sharply, "But alas, they rejected and turned away from the Father." Thessaloniki turned away from such a great Father. The reason, as St. Hierotheos explains, is that there was still the stench from the decay and the rebellion, and it had not yet been cured. Quote, "It still had the stench from the preceding decay and stagnation, and that evil and corrupt flavor and bad state had not yet been cured by the fragrance of peace." It is true that some people were troubled by the fact that St. Gregory was introduced an innovation into the divine dogmas, and this too shows that the Zealots were anti-Hesychists. But as St. Hierotheos indicated, this was an excuse, a pretext and cover for the situation, even if this was more a pretext and cover for the difficult state and the remnants of disorder. From this it seems that the Zealot movement was not so much religious as political and personal. St. Hierotheos also reports an occasion on which, during the liturgy of the feast of the Nativity of the Mother of God, a priest asked his fellow clergy to pray that God would show them how much intimacy St. Gregory, who was leaving Thessaloniki, had with him. It seems that he had entered Thessaloniki and then had been driven out by the governors of the city. The priest prayed secretly with the other clergy for the cure of his paralyzed daughter. That is to say, he asked that God would show the value of the saint by the sign that this paralyzed daughter would be cured. Then the miracle happened, and his daughter was cured. This event was the reason, quote, why they were sure of and boldly proclaimed to the others God's wonderful healing bishop equal to the apostles. Since this event took place on the feast of the Nativity of the Theotokos, we understand that St. Gregory arrived in Thessaloniki in the beginning of September 1347, that he was not received by the governors of the city, and went to the Holy Mountain. There the Holy Fathers received him with enthusiasm, having each tasted in the past a share of what flowed daily from his tongue like divine nectar. It was only in 1350 that the governor of Thessaloniki, Alexios Metokositis, asked Cantacuzene to help. The municipality of Thessaloniki, while at first it had burned the homes of the sailors and of Andrew Pelilogos, afterwards felt that it had turned around once again, as far as it could, having formed the view that it was preferable for the city to be surrendered to the Serbs in order to stop the sufferings. But in the autumn of 1350, an army arrived under the leadership of Matthew Cantacuzene, while John VI, with the young autocrat John V, arrived by sea. Finally, the city surrendered through treason. John VI summoned all the people, the whole church of Thessaloniki, and accused the zealots of having betrayed the empire and the city for money. He sent the most important of them as prisoners, whereas the rest of them were sent to exile. After his victory, John VI went back to Constantinople, leaving John V in Thessaloniki. The civil war had ended, and apparently the people of the cities, including Thessaloniki and Constantinople, had welcomed Cantacuzene with enthusiasm. All the characteristics of the zealots which we have mentioned explain their stand against St. Gregory. However, in what follows, we must examine the stand taken by St. Gregory Palamas toward the zealots, because the things that are said by some people about St. Gregory are slanderous. Among other things, it is said that St. Gregory took an energetic part in this political dispute, in the quarrel between John Pelilogos and John Cantacuzene, that he was on the side of the aristocrats, that he instigated the civil war between the two politicians, taking the side of Cantacuzene. These slanders were not only formulated by some men of our time in order to minimize the mastery and value of the great personality of St. Gregory, but also by his personal enemies already at the time when these events were unfolding. What follows will show the great personality of St. Gregory, but also the tragic consequences for the Byzantine Empire and the damage caused by the anti-Hesychists and the Zealots. 3. St. Gregory's stand toward the Civil War and the Zealots. The beginning of the Hesychistic dispute had preceded the beginning of the political battle and the civil war between John Pelilogos and John Cantacuzene. But the Hesychist dispute did not give rise to the political battle, nor did the Hesychists instigate the civil war. It can be stated with certainty that the civil war was a personal affair, and that the anti-Hesychists, mostly Patriarch Kallikas with Alexios A., instigated the beginning, slandering, and accusing of St. Gregory Palamas. Moreover, the Zealots, too, who turned against St. Gregory Palamas, did it later, while they were opposed to Hesychism from the beginning. Quote, "It is a latter fact which was created by the different stances taken by the Hesychists and the Zealots towards the disputants at that time, John V. Pelilogos and John VI. Cantacuzene. We can observe the same thing with regard to the two political men who became embroiled during the Civil War, namely John Pelilogos and John Cantacuzene. The fight between them was not a result of their different attitudes towards Hesychism, but a fruit of personal motives and causes. At any rate, Cantacuzene was a friend of Hesychism and of the Hesychist Holy Fathers, but John Pelilogos, too, as well as the Queen Mother Anne of Savoy, at times supported St. Gregory Palamas. This suggests that the dispute between St. Gregory Palamas and the anti-Hesychists was not the cause of the civil war. It had another cause, but, as was natural, the theological topics of the time became involved in it. We shall look more analytically at the positions taken by St. Gregory Palamas during the Civil War, and at his stance during that crucial period of the Byzantine Empire. A. A study of the sources shows that St. Gregory Palamas confronted this political battle and the Civil War as a genuine Hesychist monk. His biography, written by St. Hierotheos Kokkinos, says several things worth noting about this hypothesis. St. Hierotheos points out that in the beginning of the Civil War, St. Gregory tried to make peace between the opposing parties. Since Patriarch John Chalcicus had raised suspicions concerning both Cantacuzene and St. Gregory himself, the latter, on the one hand, expressed his displeasure at his stand and did not give his assent to the things that happened, and on the other hand he advised and recommended peace and harmony in keeping with his office. At the same time he asserted that if peace prevailed, it would be both to his advantage and to that of the emperor and all the people, while the reverse would have consequences for both sides and would provoke divine wrath. St. Gregory pointed these things out many times and to different persons. St. Hierotheos says that he gave advice to the Patriarch, not once or twice, not only to him, but many times in the presence of many great persons, and in the Senate, and sometimes under the chairmanship of the Queen, sometimes alone, and sometimes with others having the same opinions. At the beginning of the Civil War, St. Gregory worked as a true Hagiorite hesychist. He advised and recommended reconciliation, a return to the previous state, because he foresaw that many sufferings would come for the Greek people. But the Patriarch, instead of admiring the saint for his good sense and wise words, was angry with him, quote, and pounced on his friend, and alas, prepared to battle against the gentle counselor. For this reason, St. Gregory withdrew from Constantinople, but did not go far, weeping over the disobedience of the people and the destruction. St. Hierotheos says that he went to a place where he was accustomed to go regularly to be in peace. This shows that the saint, even during the course of his great struggles on behalf of the faith, did not abandon his beloved Hezekiah. Thus he was close to the city, being regularly in silence with himself and God, and like Jeremiah, lamenting the people's disobedience and the destruction. Detailed information about this period of his life has been preserved in letters which he himself sent to various people. For instance, there is much information in a letter which he sent, quote, to the most reverend Hierotheos of the Holy Mountain and to Philotheus, who is Saint Philotheus, the latter Patriarch of Constantinople, who was at that time abbot and Hierotheos of the Great Lavra. These letters are most important, apart from the fact that they give us many details and we can assess the attitude of St. Gregory toward the Civil War. At the same time, they reveal the frequent communion which the saint had with the Holy Mountain and the Hagiorite Fathers. He wanted to keep in touch with them and to have their approval. It also shows the power which the Holy Mountain had at that time, because Patriarch John Chalcicus had tried to spread evil reports about St. Gregory there, with the further aim of defaming him and putting an end to their trust in him. At any rate, St. Gregory had close relations and contact with the Athonite Fathers and received much help and comfort. Although the Athonite Fathers who came to Constantinople to reconcile the political parties did not succeed, they did console him, as the saint confesses. Quote, they gave us no little comfort, since we learned that the saints dwelling in the holy place were in sympathy with us. His opponents accused him to the Athonites of having seemed evil, both to the church and to the royalty, meaning directly to John Palaiologos and his intendants. But the saint replied that he was not inclined, when the civil war began, to incite men of the same race to fight against one another and to confront one battle with a new one. He himself preferred to advise them to not to look upon those of the same race as aliens, and also to cure evil with good. Then he said that the gospel commanded him to love his enemies as well, and to pray daily to God, to, quote, calm the nations. All the more should this be done for the Christians. Beg for peace from above, and pray for the peace of all men. St. Gregory said this because the Patriarch had advised him to consider John Cantacuzene as an enemy, and to proceed into action so that the enemy would be incited against him. St. Gregory could not go into such actions because he had to pray for peace and not incite war. Since he was accused of having close relations with Cantacuzene during that conflict, and naturally he was against the emperor, the saint said boldly that if it was proven that he was even in the slightest way collaborating with Cantacuzene, or if it had been revealed that the two of them were in correspondence, if it was proven that he was in close contact with anyone who had slipped away to him, or if it was seen that he took part in any events, then, quote, I too will condemn myself, for it is well deserved. It was not possible for a hesychist saint to take sides in acts of political violence and in events which caused dissension among the people. On the contrary, he constantly spoke of reconciliation, as we've seen. Quote, when the political confusion had been set in motion, we were unable to reconcile the patriarch and the other leaders. He fell into deepest sorrow for the nation and for those who had inherited from God the task of ruling it. When St. Gregory saw, as he himself confessed, that both sides were preparing to use force, their passions unbridled, and that the slaughter of men and the destruction of the whole world was under threat, he withdrew from the city because he did not consider it good to be present there. So he departed from the city to the monastery on the farther side, which was dedicated to the leaders of the heavenly hosts, grieving for his nation. Quote, I sat grieving for myself and the present nation, end quote. Every word which the saint himself used in his letter to the Athonite fathers is significant because it shows the state of his soul and the way in which he faced the tearing apart of the nation. We do not intend to analyze all the events which took place during this period, nor the matters relating to the meetings of St. Gregory with various persons, such as Patriarch John Calcicus, the Queen Mother, and the Hagiorite Fathers. About all these meetings and events, I will say what relates to the topic being analyzed here, that in all the situations, St. Gregory acted as a hesychist. When he stayed for a short space of time at the monastery of the leaders of the heavenly hosts, mourning and weeping for the sins of his nation, he understood that it was not a time for words, nor a time for sitting in silence near the city. So since he also wanted to cut off every opportunity and those who were looking for an opportunity, he fled to distant Heraclea. He himself said, and I am leaving this monastery and going somewhere far away where no one knows me. Having found out that in Heraclea there is a place that is reasonably quiet, I shall move there. He remained in that quiet place for about 4 months, without anyone at all knowing it. But in an unknown way after these months, a man was sent to seek out the saint's hut and to find incriminating elements, concrete letters from Cantacuzene. The manner of the search is significant. The diplomatic agent searched the cell and the straw mat. These were all that the great hesychist had. The saint asked him, What is it that you're looking for? He answered, Cantacuzene's letters to you. And St. Gregory said, What benefit do you think he would get from me, alone and having only this straw mat to make him so much interested in writing to me? The saint had only a straw mat. He was alone and had no communication with anyone. The messenger, not finding any incriminating element, said gently, I know, Your Holiness, but we are fulfilling an imperial order. And he took the evidence of the governor of the city that he had been there for 4 months without communicating with anyone. Indeed, apart from the man who served him, no one knew of his coming to that place. The evidence which he gave was as follows. Apart from the one who is here to serve me, I have communicated with absolutely no one during my 4-month stay here. They brought these writings as they came to the palace, having with them St. Gregory as well. Finally, the leaders said, Since he is innocent, let him be free. In spite of the proof of his innocence, the patriarch ordered them to imprison him in a monastery. This circumstance alone shows the position of St. Gregory in political affairs. A genuine hesychist does not involve himself in political conflict. He withdrew to an isolated place of stillness. He himself gives the evidence of that trackless place, where he grieved for the sins of the nation and prayed for the peace of the government and the church. Above the monastery where he stayed at first, there were places more suitable for stillness, where he took refuge for greater Hezekiah and stillness. He wrote, quote, "Above that monastery, or rather at many spots round about, there are places very suitable for enough quiet. In some places there are even copses with thick and shady trees, and suitably kept, inaccessible to the public by their private owners. And we too, when we approached them, kept a sufficient distance away." In one phase of the civil war, the saint had a close relationship with the Hagiorite fathers who were in Constantinople. He consulted them and finally did what they said. He himself at that time preferred to go to the patriarch, who asked for him, but they asked him to wait there and would go themselves to speak with the patriarch. St. Gregory obeyed and said, "I myself preferred to go again to him, but the most beloved fathers stopped me again." Well, he acted as a monk, doing obedience, cutting off his own will. The Hagiorite fathers visited the patriarch, and since they refuted the religious accusation against Palamas, as a result they heard the patriarch accuse St. Gregory of having sent 2 letters to the Asastas and 2 letters to Cantacuzene. Indeed, they stated that they had caught a monk from his escort going over to Cantacuzene with these 4 letters. Then the Hagiorite fathers answered, "Now we forfeit our heads on behalf of that man if this is true. It is slander, sir. This thing is clear slander. That man never does anything of the sort." The Hagiorite fathers' witness is remarkable. It shows the certainty which they had about St. Gregory. They knew that great Hezekiah and seer of the glory of God would not do such deeds, and they were ready to stake their lives for their faith in this great spiritual man. Their certainty that this was slander was spoken twice in order to express their confidence in the innocence of St. Gregory. To be sure, in what followed, the Hagiorites asked then and there for the arrested monk to be brought forth with the letters. Naturally, no such thing happened because it really was the patriarch's slander. The things reported are noteworthy because they show St. Gregory's stance toward the civil war. He did not take an active part in this conflict, but prayed continually for the reconciliation of the leaders and the people. The saint himself confessed that from the time when the affairs of government became disordered, at first he purposefully avoided seeing or speaking with anyone, and later he was imprisoned in a monastery by the patriarch without any justice. And during conversations, St. Gregory spoke as a hesychist. Once during that troubled period when the patriarch, the empress, and many leaders were present and hearing, as he himself says, things unsuitable for my ears, he found himself in great embarrassment. He was confronted with 2 alternatives. One was to say what he believed and to be a burden to those present, and the other was to keep silent and not escape God's judgment. He preferred to be troublesome to those present rather than to sin against God and against the whole race of those called by Christ's name. He spoke the language of truth, but with much discretion and care. He himself says that he offered his thoughts to the ears of those present, mixing the saving medicine of truth with honey, that is to say, he mingled friendly words with the truth. A great conversation ensued, during which the others did not keep their placidity to the end. But he was gentle and meek throughout the conversation, quote, "But we, again using the gentlest possible words, and praying to Christ for the most honorable ending to these matters, retired." This peaceable attitude of St. Gregory naturally provoked the patriarch, who made every effort to find a motive for subjecting him to terrible suffering. But the saint gave himself over to the providence of God, and this is an example of a true hesychist. He took the appropriate measures, spoke in a kindly way, avoided clashes, especially on a political level, and in the end abandoned himself to God. Quote, "We, emboldening ourselves toward God, to whom we also seek to belong as far as we can, whether we suffer or not, remained among those who had contrived everything against us until the Sunday of the Holy Fathers." B. This hesychistic stance of St. Gregory did not mean that he concealed his sympathy toward Cantacuzene. From the beginning of the discord, he recommended a return to the conditions before the political dispute, when Cantacuzene was the guardian of the juvenile John Palaiologos. And he was looking at this, as is seen from his writings and all the existing evidence, from the point of view of calming the people and avoiding conflict, as well as from the point of view of the truth prevailing. We know that the saint believed that the orthodox views would prevail more through Cantacuzene, since Patriarch Callicas, who had been made guardian of John Palaiologos, was allied with Akindinos, champion of the views of the anti-hesychists. This is why St. Gregory showed sympathy with Cantacuzene, but without sharing actively in the political conflict. In addition to these things, St. Gregory called for the reconciliation of the two opposing parties. Just as in the beginning he acted as a true hesychist, recommending peace, so also at the appropriate time he contributed to the reconciliation of the two political men. After the fall of John Calcacus from the patriarchal throne and the entrance of John Cantacuzene into Constantinople, the two opposing parties were reconciled, also with the concurrence of St. Gregory, who had just been released from prison. His reconciling work is also seen at other moments of his life. At another time during the year 1354, at the entry of the Anna Palaiologan, he undertook a journey to the capital for the reconciliation. He did it with great difficulty, since he had recently fallen ill. This journey brought dreadful trials to St. Gregory, because before he had time to go to Constantinople, he was captured by the Turks, and was held prisoner for a year, when he went through many torments and dangers. C. The fact that St. Gregory neither instigated nor intervened in the political conflict is seen also from the good relations which he had with John Palaiologos and the Queen Mother Anna Palaiologina. And it is true that in one phase of the conflict they had been somewhat influenced against him by the slanders of Patriarch John Calcacus, but in general the royalty had sympathy for the saint. The greatest miseries which the saint endured were caused by John Calcacus. While he was Metropolitan of Thessaloniki, St. Gregory had good relations with the royalty who were staying in the city. When St. Gregory was celebrating the Divine Liturgy in Thessaloniki, quote, many times the emperor himself was in the church, and the first to receive the sacrament. And when the saint concelebrated with the Patriarch in Constantinople, John Palaiologos was present, quote, and the holy gift of blessed bread from Thessaloniki was openly received with joy. And when after the conversation which he had with Gregoras in the royal palace, the latter was going back to Thessaloniki, he supplied him with letters of recommendation. His letters also contain his praises of the Emperor John Palaiologos and the Queen Mother Anna Palaiologina. He calls him a most divine king, and says particularly that he, Gregoras, did not feel sorry for himself, Palamas, nor for the most reverend emperor. Then he praises John Palaiologos because just as he had the seal of power from his infancy, so also by the grace of God he had inborn godliness. He further praised John Palaiologos because as a child he had expelled Barlaam and Akindidos from the realm. He praised the Queen Mother, Anna Palaiologina, as well. He called her holy and most devout and mistress of all and a lover of uprightness. Quote, this presiding king with his holy mother and our mistress, whom every tongue proclaims as devout and a lover of uprightness. All these things show that the saint did not harbor antipathies toward the political leaders. If the Emperor John Palaiologos and the Queen Mother had experienced that St. Gregory was taking part in the political conflict on behalf of Cantacuzene, they would have acted differently toward him. In spite of the reconciliation, they would have taken another stance. If they had been clearly opposed to hesychism, then too St. Gregory would not have spoken in that way. Therefore, we have the assurance that the civil war had a personal character, and the cause was personal, not religious. D. St. Gregory took exactly the same position toward the zealots of Thessaloniki as he did toward the civil war for the imperial throne. This great Hesychist father could not act differently, because he would have betrayed himself and the Hesychist theology which he was living and preaching. The way in which he confronted the zealots was exemplary. After his election, which took place in 1347, he went to Thessaloniki to take up his pastoral work in a tragic period, when the city was being governed by the zealot leaders. There are several elements which give us a picture of the situation. The first is that the two political men, John Palaiologos and John Cantacuzene, had already become reconciled, also with the help and effort of St. Gregory. The second is that Patriarch John Calcicus had been declared dethroned because he had been the chief instigator of the political dispute, spreading suspicions against Cantacuzene and St. Gregory, with the purpose of himself becoming the guardian of the young John Palaiologos. The third is that St. Gregory, as we've shown, did not participate actively in the political dispute and strife, but he did cooperate in bringing about the reconciliation of the two great political men. Nevertheless, the zealots of Thessaloniki did not accept the saint as metropolitan. St. Gregory, as a hesychist, did not insist on staying in Thessaloniki, but took refuge on the holy mountain. His behavior was that of a great spiritual father and a spiritual pastor. He did not wish to create conflicts and discord within the flock. At the same time, he refused the offers of the leaders of the Serbs, Stephen Dusan, to support him with other long-term goals. He behaved as a Roman. St. Hierotheos says that unfortunately the catastrophic situation among the Romans had consecrated that man, meaning Stephen Dusan, king of not the smallest part of Romanity. Stephen Dusan, exploiting the civil strife as well as the zealots' rebellion, became the possessor of a large part of the Romanity. He also tried to win St. Gregory over. Among other things, he said to him that it was shameless that the Romans were driving him away and not allowing him to be installed in the church assigned to him, while he, if he would trust in his words, would grant him both churches and lands. Indeed, he mentioned to him that he would have authority over annual tributes and money. The saint's answer was that of a monk, a hesychist. First, he gave him an illustration. If someone takes a sponge, which can hold a glass of water, and throws it into the middle of the Aegean Sea, he cannot get out of the sponge more water than it can hold. That is to say, it will still take a glass of water and leave all the rest of the water in the sea. Then he applied the example to himself and the life of the monks. The monks, too, do just the same thing. Having learned of old to live on little and only what is necessary, even if they should be given all the gold on earth and under the earth, and even if they were brought to the mythical stream of Paktolos, it would not attract their attention any further than their daily food and necessities. And he ended by saying, quote, "So what you tell us about those many great gifts and money is not at all necessary for us. Indeed," he said characteristically, "we have absolutely no need for political authority or lands and tributes and revenues and abundant wealth." St. Gregory's words show that he lived in extreme poverty. He maintained to the limit the monastic virtue of poverty. We have already seen this before, that he had the use of just one hut and one mat and nothing more. He lived very ascetically. I say this both to emphasize the saint's attitude towards wealth, that he did not live aristocratically, and in order to interpret correctly the reason for the zealot's attitude towards St. Gregory. At the same time, he did not pursue political rule and authority. He was a genuine ascetic bishop. St. Gregory had also previously made a second attempt to enter Thessaloniki, when he had gone up to Constantinople. This must have been done in the autumn of 1348. He had been urged to do this by both Patriarch Isidore and the emperors, who, as we know, had made peace with each other. Unfortunately, once again he was unsuccessful in taking up his pastoral work for the people. This happened because the leaders of the zealots were demanding from the emperors great rewards beyond their class and station, for their disorder and uprising. St. Hierotheos observes that they should have been condemned to death and not awarded prizes. St. Gregory found himself in a dilemma: to identify absolutely with the zealots and not mention the emperors in order to gain his throne, or, remaining faithful to the emperors, not to agree to stay in the city. He preferred the second choice for two basic reasons. One was in order not to violate the existing laws, and the other because he saw that discord and rebellion were smoldering again in Thessaloniki. Here again he behaved as a hesychist Hagiorite. He respected the legal authority, and for no reason would he involve himself in rebellions and disturbances, in uprisings and compulsions. Moreover, great carnage had taken place in Thessaloniki, and the saint could not associate himself with the massacres, and he wanted to keep away from the legal authority. Also, he saw the danger that faced Romanity, the race of the Romans, as he said. The saint behaved as a Roman bishop, and not as one who self-interestedly sought only to enjoy the episcopal throne. Finally, after the expulsion of the zealots and the liberation of the city from their occupation, St. Gregory was enthroned in Thessaloniki. This took place in 1350, 3 years after his election, and after he had twice been unable to take up his pastoral duty. What St. Hierotheos says about the insurgents, about their withdrawal, and about St. Gregory's enthronement is significant. First, he says that those who did not accept St. Gregory on his first arrival at Thessaloniki were a very small number, who were wicked, corrupt, and unworthy. Then he says that the city itself rose up against them and thrust out and banished some of them and brought others of them to reason and stopped their worst impulse and malicious deeds with the appropriate therapeutic medicines. These characterizations are indicative of the mentality and work of the zealots. The reception which the people had in store for St. Gregory when he returned from Lemnos was magnificent. This reception cannot at all be compared with royal, victorious, and triumphal entries. He was clothed in a full-length tunic and holy vestments for his entry into Thessaloniki. At the city gates he addressed a prayer to our Lord Jesus Christ for the calming of the people. The saint prayed, "Having become like that, we raged against one another, and we not only rejoiced in one another's behavior, but also in slaughters, no longer bearing in ourselves thy image of a loving Father, but of him, alas, who was a murderer of men from the beginning. Why mention our false oaths, shameful words, disgraceful deeds, unseen tricks, slander against one another, open warfare against one another, greed, abductions? We really fell into the depths of evil. We were truly in the grip of a clever chain of sins. It is for thee alone to loose the chains again. It is for thee to cancel the sins. I pray that thou wilt banish the old curse and renew our nature, washing away even now the filth that came to this people from madness, and purify them of their shame, renewing at once a right spirit in their inward parts, and give them repentance unto irrevocable salvation. Free them from strife against one another, reconcile them to themselves and one another. Grant them to live in peace and harmony for the remainder of their lives. Grant them the necessary submission and goodwill in deeds and words that are due to our divine emperors, to whom thou hast given the right to rule on earth, and that are due to thy holy church and to us who only by this grace of thine stand before them, that the emperors and rulers and shepherds and flocks, looking toward one thing, thy holy will, and with their steps led by thee, may find well-being now and attain future bliss." This prayer, which was addressed to God before the gate of Thessaloniki, shows on the one hand the tragic condition of the city which preceded it, and on the other hand the Hagiorite mind of St. Gregory. Thessaloniki had been through dreadful trials. The zealots had brought great misery. Many passions prevailed in the city, such as those of wars, abductions, greed, slanders, hidden traps, perjuries, obscenities, lewd conduct, and so forth. This is why it had to be purified. God had to receive the repentance of its inhabitants. This prayer also shows St. Gregory's work of reconciliation. Only such a great saint could reconcile the spirits and release the inhabitants from such sins and passions which weaken love. As he came through the city to be enthroned, all the singers sang resurrectional hymns, as if they were seeing the resurrected Christ. They sang, "Let us purify our senses, and we shall see Christ shining with the unapproachable light of the resurrection." On the third day after his entrance, the saint appointed a procession of all the people and a litany with holy icons, the singings of psalms and prayers. All the inhabitants of Thessaloniki were present at this litany. Most of the city passed through, praying, praising, giving thanks for the past, praying for the future. At the end of the litany, he spoke to the people about concord. This first speech of the great bishop is a model of reason and peaceful mission. At the beginning, he set the true theological prerequisite for society. He spoke of our common Father and our brotherhood in Christ. God created us, but we are brothers through Adam, our common first ancestor. Also, the brotherhood is strengthened by the kinship we have with our common mother, the Church. Moreover, Christ is our head. The Christians are one body. They have Christ as their head. They have one baptism. They have one faith, one hope, one God. Thus they ought to be closely bound together with love. Then he refers to the concrete events which have shaken Thessaloniki. While they should have had love, hatred had entered in, assisted by the evil one. Thus, in an authentic way, he gives us a description of the condition which prevailed during the occupation of the city by the Zealots. The information is valuable. The hatred which entered in broke the communion and unity with God and the brethren. It paralyzed the city, created opposing sides, confusions, and disturbances, giving the appearance that the city had been seized by enemies. The inhabitants were running all over the town, some destroying the houses, others seizing what they found in them, and with great mania were searching for the masters of the houses in order to murder them mercilessly and inhumanely. And the saint cried out, "Oh, the passion! Oh, the magnitude of the misery! She is fighting against herself. She is fighting for herself. She is pursued by her own feet. She is demolished by her own hands. She is blamed by her own voices, and she observes the phenomenon that the higher ones have folded up with fear, and the obscene and indecent have the mastery." Like a real shepherd and a true physician, he lays before them the city's passion, its wound. However, this is not enough in itself, but he proceeds to the cure as well. It is not enough for the doctor to reveal the wound, but he cures it as well. The saint does the same thing with his therapeutic and pacifying words. He emphasizes that he is not trying to blame them, but when they recognize the illness, they will then cure it. Quote, "But do not be distressed at hearing these things." The wise saint anticipates his hearers' impatience. He tells them that they must search for the cause of their fall. Quote, "Seek the cause of your fall, and you will long for the cure. You will hasten to possess it and preserve it." The cause of the hatred and the disturbances is sin. The saint, as a great father, realizes that the purpose of the rebellions was not simply social reforms and changes, but sin. All these things are instigated by the devil. He analyzes very vividly how sin is the cause of the uprising. Quote, "Thus it is from sin that a civil uprising and disorder come upon us, which brings on every sort of evil and establishes the rule of evil in its ringleaders and insurgents, and this makes into wild beasts those in whom it takes hold." These words of the Holy Father are an excellent Christian sociology. Here, too, is also seen the Church's view of sociology. It does not examine society and its problems autonomously, but as seen in the light of its withdrawal from God and the devil's warfare. Real society is a union of man with God, and man's apostasy from God, his falling away from God in all things. accompanied by the experience of the deceitful demon, constitutes anti-society. Social changes without regard for freedom and love are antisocial manifestations. On this point, we can also see the value of the social teaching of St. Gregory Palamas. However, the saint is not a dry sociologist, but a real father and pastor, that is to say, a physician for men who are ill. In saying these things, he justifies them in a way. Comparing the case of the people of Thessaloniki with the paralytic of the Gospel, who sat at the pool of Siloam, he says that there are two similarities. Just as the paralytic remained at the pool without leaving, so also they did not leave the church completely. Quote, "And you too did not withdraw completely from the church of Christ, which awards peace." End quote. And just as he did not have anyone to help him, so also they found for such a long time they did not have a shepherd to pacify them. Quote, "In the same way you too here did not have a shepherd to preach peace, to gather the scattered members, to make peace among them and cast the illness of hatred and corruption out of the body of the church of Christ." Then he proceeds to exhort and spur them on. Exhort and spur them on. They had no shepherd, but now they have. He himself will comfort them and cure them. He advises them to be reconciled with God, to recognize their kinship with one another, to recall the old days of peace. He exhorts them not to think evil, and do not seek to return evil for evil, but to conquer evil with goodness. Let them embrace love, abide by the good tidings of peace, and indeed work with him for reconciliation. His service is a service of peace and love. He is a servant of this work. They must be reconciled and of one mind, having Christ in their midst. As it appears from the summing up of that first sermon by St. Gregory, on the one hand it presents the illness and cure of the insurgents and of the whole city, and on the other hand, those who have been wronged are urged not to pay back the evil, but to make peace and to love their enemies. This framework contains the whole reconciling work of St. Gregory Palamas, but also of the true shepherds of the Church. Actually, after great anomalies have occurred, great self-control and a strong personality are needed in order to cure the people's anger. St. Hierotheos Kokkinos has preserved the information that after this sermon, the saint made friends even with those who had slandered him, and those who had previously been enemies and rebels. He made not only friends, but also servants, in the sense that they fell at his feet, kissed them, confessed the sins which they had committed, and asked for forgiveness. The saint not only pardoned them, but also did something greater. Quote, "And he made them his friends and intimates, and to the end he did not cease to do good to them with words and deeds." He also held an assembly of clergy and reminded them their duties. In all these ways St. Gregory brought peace and cured the Christians. By his action and example, he brought almost all of them to progress and improvement. From this analysis of the attitude taken by St. Gregory Palamas to the Civil War and the Zealots, we can draw a few conclusions. First, the quarrel between John Palaiologos and John Cantacuzene had personal causes. In essence, there was great interference from Patriarch John Chalcicus, for he himself claimed the right to be the guardian of the young John Palaiologos. The theological topics of that time were brought in later. The chief cause was the political, and mainly personal one. Second, even though the Zealots had a religious basis insofar as they were monks in this category as well, nevertheless other things, not religion, were the cause of the uprising. They were lined up on the side of John Palaiologos and the emperor's mother Anna Palaiologina because they had a particular liking for them, and they were against Cantacuzene because they wanted autonomy and not to be subordinated to the central government. The poor refugees who were included with the Zealots gave a social character to this movement. The leaders of the Zealots, who were few, proceeded to violence, enticing a part of the population to go along with them. We have no witnesses as to what deeds they carried out, but from the information given us by St. Hierotheos Kokkinos and St. Gregory Palamas, they must not have done much, since the people had been dissatisfied in any case and welcomed the change. just as they welcomed the coming of St. Gregory with great relief and joy. Thus the Zealots created many anomalies, and they are accused of ethnic betrayal because they wanted to surrender Thessaloniki to the Serbs at the expense of the Romans. Third, St. Gregory Palamas acted both toward the civil war and toward the Zealots as a true Hagiorite monk, and indeed as a hesychist. He always sought to make peace, either through silence or through words, or by acts or sacrifices. St. Gregory was not identified with any political party or with the aristocrats, since he lived as a poor monk, but he was always on the side of peace. He was a genuine healer of men. A careful study of the sources shows that St. Gregory was a man of God, a hesychist in all his deeds and actions. 4. The Romanity of St. Gregory and the anti-Romanity of the anti-hesychists. On the preceding pages we mentioned a number of times that St. Gregory acted as a Roman. Since this can be misinterpreted, I would like to give some further explanations. And of course I think that the development of this topic belongs to the present chapter because Romanity has a strong social content and character. Romanity is a particular attitude of life on all subjects. I shall explain this further in what follows. A. When we speak of Romanity, we mean a particular tradition which is called Byzantine, or Greek Orthodox. The term Greek Orthodox is synonymous with Romanity. The Romaic civilization is a Greek civilization, and the transfer of the center of the Roman Empire from the Old Rome to the New Rome and the acceptance of Christianity or Orthodoxy as the official religion of the empire is what characterizes Romanity. Orthodox theology is the substructure and basis of Romanity, and is indeed true orthodoxy in its essential expression, which is hesychism. The way in which a person is cured, the return of the nous to the heart from wandering in the surroundings, and its ascent to God, man's passage through the 3 stages of the spiritual life, purification of the heart, illumination of the nous, and deification is what makes a person a real and unerring theologian. This was the spiritual atmosphere of the Holy Fathers. This distinguishes the Holy Fathers from the heretics. The former were hesychists, the latter were conjecturers. The theology of the Church, as it was expressed by St. Gregory Palamas, is an expression of Romanity, of Byzantium. The whole civilization and way of life of the Romans, of those who lived in Constantinople, which is now called Byzantium, had been under the influence of the authentic theology of the Church. This is why the monasteries were centers of life and witness, and the Holy Mountain played an important role in the history of Romanity. The life in Constantinople at the time of which we are speaking was almost like the life of the Holy Mountain. The emperors expressed this life. Consequently, hesychism, which St. Gregory Palamas lived and expressed, was not alien to the Greek spirit, but rather its foundation. Therefore, it was condemned by the anti-hesychism of the philosophers and conjecturers. B. St. Gregory Palamas calls the inhabitants of what is called the Byzantine Empire Romans. This term has 2 basic meanings. One refers to Greek civilization, that is, the language and the consciousness, and the other to orthodoxy. We must say that orthodoxy has greater force. When the Turks took St. Gregory prisoner and took him to Nafpaktos, he underwent many hardships and torments. Speaking of all these circumstances in a letter which he sent to his church, the Church of Thessaloniki, he said, among other things, quote, "Not only the depravity itself of their emotions and the resulting wasting of their flesh and the almost slackness of their members, but also much fuss on my behalf, supposedly on the part of the Romans there, came to the ears of the barbarians." End quote. The Orthodox Christians praised St. Gregory to the Turks, and this created problems for him, because the Turks, learning that he was an important man, increased the ransom, and so made it difficult for him to get his release. St. Gregory calls the Orthodox Christians Romans. In the discussions which he had with the Turks, they told him, among other things, that they were ruling because of their godliness, And St. Gregory said, quote, "This irreverent and God-hating, infamous race are boasting of ruling over the Romans by their love of God." End quote. Here, too, we see that the inhabitants of the so-called Byzantine Empire are not called Byzantines, but Romans, just as today the Patriarch is Archbishop of New Rome and Ecumenical Patriarch. The term Byzantine was given first by the Franks in a derisive sense, and with the idea of regarding themselves as the successors of the Romans. Constantly being moved as a captive, the saint writes somewhere, quote, "And at his command we were taken to the border area inhabited by Roman Christians, in which there was a residence for the royal ambassadors." End quote. The Christian Orthodox, the inhabitants of the Eastern Roman Empire, are called Roman Christians. The Romans are distinguished from the Franks, who occupied the Old Rome, for in the Orthodox tradition the word Romans has a special meaning. This term is not used only by St. Gregory Palamas. We find it also in St. Hierotheos Kokkinos. He praises the great financial minister of the palace, Theodore Metr, for governing the affairs of the Romans with skill, quote, "admired by all at that time, and he also governs the public moneys of the Romans, mediating matters skillfully." End quote. When Barlaam of Calabria came to these parts, it is said that he came to the land of the Romans. Quote, "Barlaam from Calabria had just then arrived in the land of the Romans, to his own harm." End quote. Stephen Dusan, the Serbian leader of Tribali, took possession of a sector of the Byzantine power, a part of the empire of the Romans, quote, "and it elected him king of a considerable part of the empire of the Romans." End quote. Stephan still held unsteadily the rule over the Romans' land. This shows that there was a clear distinction between Serbs and Romans. The fact that Romans is the national name of the inhabitants of the Byzantine Empire is seen from the use of the name in the tradition. For example, to mention a saying of Maximus the Confessor, quote, "We have a command not to hate anyone. I love the Romans as having the same faith, and the Greeks as having the same tongue." End quote. There is a distinction between the Greeks and Romans. The Hellenes are Greeks who speak the Greek language and are worshippers of idols, while the Orthodox are Romans. Thus, the Byzantine Empire in our tradition is identified with the Roman Empire and not distinguished from it, while the Byzantines also are the Romans who have a Greek civilization and Orthodox faith. C. St. Gregory was a true Roman, since he had a Greek upbringing, but above all, Orthodox experience and life. These things were united in his life and teaching. It is in this light that we must see his struggles, since the stages of spiritual perfection, which constitute hesychism, are the heart of Romanity, and the struggles of St. Gregory as a Roman refer to the maintenance of the foundation of the nation. At the same time, St. Gregory as a Roman accepts legal authority and distinguishes legality from perseverance in the received traditions in the keeping of hesychism. It is within these frames of reference that we must look at the heroic struggles of St. Gregory Palamas. Moreover, as a genuine Roman, he did not collaborate with the enemies of Romanity at its expense, even if he was treated unjustly. We have seen the reply which he gave to Stephan Dusan when the latter reminded him how shamefully the Romans had banished him. The Roman is an aristocrat of the spirit, and he would rather be unjustly treated by other Romans than betray his Romanity. And still, as a genuine Orthodox, all his life he was interested in making peace among the people. On taking up the shepherding of his flock, he led the people by the criteria of the Orthodox tradition, by the true presuppositions of Romanity. D. While the hesychist fathers were Romans and through their struggles really protected the essence of this Romanity, the anti-hesychists were alien to this spirit. Barlaam came from Calabria and was a representative of the scholasticism of the West, which he attempted to transplant into the heart of the Roman Empire. His followers and successors possessed philosophical principles and based themselves more on philosophy than on empirical theology. An obvious example was Gregoras, with whom St. Gregory came into dialogue during the last phase of the hesychist debate. Also, Patriarch John Calicus, was driven by opposition to the perceptions of Romanity. He was against the Hesychist fathers. He was driven by the passions of love of power and love of glory, and as we've seen, he was the chief cause of the outbreak of the Civil War. When a person discards the essence of the Orthodox tradition, he is not a Roman. E. It is said by some who look at things with other distorted lenses that the Hesychist dispute contributed to the decay and the fall of Constantinople. Yannis Kordatos writes, quote, some theologians such as Barlaam, Akinidos, Prokoros, Sidonis, and others fought against the Hesychists and their teaching, but without effect, because the synods which took place in the city, that is, the synods of 1341, 1347, and 1368, were judged by the nonsense of the Hesychists. I shall not make a great analysis of the indiscretion of this statement, but I will emphasize a few points briefly. The teaching of St. Gregory Palamas and the Hesychist fathers is not nonsense, but refers to the most basic problems which concern man. These are the so-called existential problems, with which man is unhappy and despairing on every level when they are not solved. Moreover, it is within the purification of the heart that all the social, biological, ecological, and more general problems are rightly solved. A person who has been cured is more genuine and true. The development of contemporary existential philosophy and contemporary humanistic psychotherapy shows us the permanent value of the Hesychist teaching. Feudalism and capitalism are expressions of Western theology, which removed from the heart of Christianity the essence of the Orthodox holy tradition. And Marxism is an offspring of Western metaphysics. That is why it moves in the same frames, leaving man unsatisfied and insecure. The Hesychist teaching, as St. Gregory Palamas expressed it, constituted the backbone of the life of the Roman Empire for thousands of years. The Roman Empire achieved great things and showed forth such a great civilization that it acknowledged today by all the Western people, just because it was based on these spiritual foundations which serenity of soul and body gave to man. The fall of Constantinople is not due to the Orthodox tradition nor to the Hesychistic struggles, but to other causes. First, it is due to the damage done to Constantinople by the Crusaders, carried on by the Westerners, chiefly the Fourth Crusade of 1204, which was also the final blow to the Roman Empire. The animosity of the Franks played a great part in this damage. Secondly, it was due to the anti-Hesychists. We've already seen analytically that the political dispute mortally wounded the Roman Empire, and that this was started by the anti-Hesychists and not by St. Gregory Palamas. Thirdly, St. Gregory did everything to pacify the people and the leaders. I do not think there are any records which show that St. Gregory took part in the political dispute. The texts which we have presented tell a different story. F. We can say, however, that the Hesychistic debate and the victory of the Orthodox tradition were a blessing from God for the coming bondage of our nation. God prepared the people in this way to be able to endure the miserable bondage. Throughout the Turkish rule, which is one of the most shining pages of our nation's history, the Hesychistic life was the center of the enslaved Greeks. This Hesychistic way of life sustained the race by the national and Orthodox consciousness. It brought to notice the martyrs and confessors of the faith, created organized societies and associations, preserved inner freedom of the soul, and created the Revolution of 1821. It is well known, as confirmed by scholars, that all the heroes of the Revolution were educated on the basis of the Romaic tradition and were not inspired by the Western Enlightenment. In the tradition of our race, we had our own enlightenment, the enlightenment of the nous, as St. Gregory, of St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, and others lived it. G. So the dilemma, St. Gregory or Barlaam, and the turn in favor of the former was salvation for our race. The choice made then by the race was effectual, and therefore we are existing to this day. This can also be seen from the fact that while through 400 years of slavery we kept the essence of the Romaic tradition, we have since then become westernized in 160 years of free living. The dilemma which existed then, west or east, is the same one that also exists today. The choice of the east had saving consequences. We do not know what is in store for our nation when every day we see the anti-Hesychistic way of life being chosen. H. Today, more than at any other time, we are becoming aware of the great value of the Romaic Hesychistic tradition. Man today is seeking a cure because he understands that the psychological and existential problems are very appalling and are not being resolved by social activities. Modern sciences speak of the cure of the subconscious. The Orthodox tradition does just this, curing the core of man's existence. This is why Hesychism, as St. Gregory Palamas expressed it, and the Orthodox Church has preserved it, as the apple of its eye, is the life of the contemporary world. Apart from other things, the Hesychistic way is the most social way of living. True, authentic sociality can exist only within man's healing, within his change from self-seeking love to selfless love. Common ownership, or shedding of all possessions apart from man's healing and the participation of the Holy Spirit, is utopia. We find true sociality in the Orthodox monasteries, which preserve the life of the apostolic churches. In what follows, we shall take a look at the social character of the Orthodox tradition as taught and lived by St. Gregory Palamas. The Romaic way of life is the truest and most human. 5. The social teaching of St. Gregory. At the point where we find ourselves, we shall study as best we can, but also somewhat briefly, St. Gregory's teaching about various social problems which concerned his flock. St. Gregory was a great theologian of the Church, but at the same time a shepherd as well, who faced all the problems of the people. Moreover, since man is made up of soul and body, the problems of the soul and spirit are not isolated from those of the body and matter. However, before we go on to analyze this topic, we make two necessary and essential distinctions. The first is that all that will be said comes from the sermons which the saint addressed to his flock in Thessaloniki. As Archbishop of Thessaloniki, he confronted definite problems and had to concern himself with their cure. The second is that what we're going to say will not be a full analysis of the social teaching of St. Gregory, but a small statement which will, however, manifest the saint's great spiritual wealth and his great love for his flock. We shall emphasize finally some points where the social dimension of his theology can be seen. A. We should not forget that the saint bases his teaching about social problems on his ecclesiology. As can be seen in his sermons, he often refers to the Church, which is the body of Christ, where we share in the uncreated grace of God and are nourished by the body and blood of Christ. All the Christians in the Church constitute a unity, a society. Furthermore, this is the true society. Therefore, Christianity makes all the social adjustments within the area of the Church. B. True sociality is a fruit and result of hesychism. Hesychism is not individual salvation. It is not a simple religious manifestation of man's life apart from the rest of the community life, but it is the true substance of the community. In his sermons, he analyzes repeatedly the fact that the loss of our relationship with God has dreadful consequences also in interpersonal relations. When a person's nous is withdrawn from his heart, and therefore withdrawn from God, he is made ferocious, and the social problems spring up again. The scattering of the nous by the senses into the environment makes the passible part of the soul subservient to creatures, with the result that the passions of vice are developed. Thus, sociology is closely linked with pathology and hesychism. This is a very fundamental point in the teaching of St. Gregory Palamas and should not be overlooked, but since we've spoken about the sickness of the nous and the development of the passions in previous chapters, we shall not enlarge on that further here. In any case, man's greatest problem, paradoxical as it may seem at first glance, is death, with its frightening consequences. Moreover, after sin and the entrance of death, man put on the coats of skin of decay and mortality. It is precisely this which creates many problems. Insecurity, fear, anxiety about the future, the sense of mortality, the coming of illnesses, and the approach of death are elements of abnormality in the psychosomatic organism. Death is one of the greatest problems which man has to face. Therefore, the overcoming of death, which takes place through Orthodox hesychism, is what man needs, and what the Orthodox Church offers. C. When a person is cured, he is brought to love, which is a theological and social virtue. For in reality, love is an expression of the communion and union of man with God, which results in the restoration of his relations with his fellow men as well. Therefore, we repeat, love is the most theological virtue, but also the most social one. In St. Gregory's sermons, we find many passages which speak of real love. In the Church, through all its sacramental and ascetic life, man is struggling to transform selfish love into unselfish love. A self-loving and selfish person cannot truly love, whereas one who loves God and loves mankind is genuine in his expression of love. We can see this clearly even today on the Holy Mountain, where we meet monks who have been purified and who really love us. This is why it is necessary for man to be cured. The cure of the soul, of which the Church speaks continually, is the foundation of true sociality. St. Gregory says that there are several signs indicating that a person has attained real love. One is that the nous has been freed from lower things and has risen to God, when he naturally forgets everything and is constantly mindful of God. Another is that, quote, you pray to the Lord in compunction and sweet pain of heart, equally for yourself and for every person, known and unknown, enemy and friend, whether he is sorry or not. End quote. The first constitutes love for God, and the second constitutes love for the neighbor. For more, St. Gregory Palamas, homily number 44. To continue, here we see clearly that hesychism and noetic prayer do not work in a Buddhistic type of atmosphere, or in apathy in the Stoic sense of the term, but in a constant movement and offering of love. The hesychistic life without love is alien to Orthodox theology. If someone cannot distinguish between the Buddhistic way of life and the Orthodox hesychistic way of life, it means that he is totally ignorant of our holy tradition. Real love, as communion and unity, can be seen in the Church, which is the body of Christ. We said before that the saint's sociology is closely linked with his ecclesiology. In fact, in one sermon, the saint underlines the truth that we all comprise a unity and communion in the body of Christ, in which essentially there are no leader and led. Thus among us no one is leader and no one led, but all of us by his grace are one faith in him, and in him we belong to the one body of his church, having him as its one head. Homily 15. Linked with this teaching that we belong to the one body is that other teaching that we must care about our brothers, since we're all members of the body of Christ. It is impossible for members of the human body not to care about one another. Let us love one another, let us tolerate one another, and let us be concerned for one another, since we are members of one another. Wherever there is hatred, it is an indication of absence of love. A person cannot love God and hate his brother. One who hates his neighbor and fights with him bears witness against himself that he does not love God. When a person prolongs his provocation to anger, he is led to insults against his brother, and he does not return to calm and reconciliation, whereupon he falls from the light of love and is filled with darkness, and of course has the devil, the ruler of darkness, dwelling within him. Therefore the saint advises Christians to control the passion of anger, which drives out love and abolishes with interpersonal relations. Thus love has a clearly theological and social content, and of course this love is inconceivable apart from the Church and the cure of man. Only by the method which the Orthodox Church has is man able to turn selfish love into unselfish, and so to love truly. D. Charity, too, is linked with love. This human charity is closely linked with God's mercy and with the mercy and sympathy which we show to our fellow men, who are our brothers. In his homilies, he often refers to the great value of the virtue of charity. The good thing about charity is twofold. In the first place, it is the giving of housing, shelter, food, and timely help to those in need. In the second place, it is forbearance, forgiveness, and sympathy toward those at fault. Christ taught both forms of charity. In the passage about the future judgment, he pointed to the necessity for us to do good and show mercy toward those of our brothers in need. And in the parable about the man who owed 10,000 talents, he pointed to charity as sympathy and forgiveness. Kindness to our brothers, says St. Gregory, has many forms. He says this apparently because people then as now were claiming that they could not be generous because of poverty and other difficulties. But charity has many forms. If a person cannot cure with a soft word, he may do it with a comforting one. If a person cannot serve the needs of his brother, he can pass on the requisites which he has. If he is not equipped for teaching or supervising, he can become the other's teacher by his personal life and example. If people abuse him and slander him and say many things against him, he should still remain undisturbed without changing his manner of behavior, but be decent to himself and to those who slander him. So we see clearly that charity is not only the giving of some material goods, it is a person's whole decent behavior toward his brother. Moreover, the saint also emphasizes the good aspects of charity. Man, he says, cannot take on the virtue of his fellow man, nor pass it on. But with charity he can make up for his failing and avoid the responsibility for the shortcoming. This happens through passing on these earthly and low necessities of the body, I mean foods and drinks, clothing, and the gold and silver which each possesses. Thus one can make up for the rest by passing on what is possible. This method of salvation is especially necessary for those who live in the world and will attain the salvation of their souls in this way. For more on this, see St. Gregory, PALAMAS, homily number 48, as published by Mount Tabor Press. To continue, so charity is either an expression of oneness with God or a path for reaching salvation. In these two ways, the Christian gives expression to his conviction that he will be freed from his enslavement to created and perishable things, and to his desire for salvation. Apart from this, charity is also a way of attaining God's mercy. Quote, let us adjust our behavior economically so as to please God. Let us liberate so that we may be liberated. Let us be charitable so that we may receive charity manifoldly. Let us have compassion and kindliness. Let us of ourselves give evidence of love for our brother and devotion to our common Father and Lord of goodwill. End quote, homily 13. He speaks of economy, because in fact man is a steward of the earth. He also speaks of having compassion and kindliness. So we realize that charity in the Orthodox Church is not simply the giving of some money or material goods, but it is at the same time the giving of compassion and kindness. It is a psychosomatic offering to our brothers and sisters. Moreover, today most people are in need of this love and are in need of this kindliness. E. The saint is not a sociologist in the sense in which it is understood today, but he's a theologian in the full sense of the word, and is therefore a true sociologist. It is in this light that we should look at the relevant topics which he deals with, such as the value of money. In his sermon on the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, he makes very interesting observations about the value and meaning of money. Not all men can do the same work and produce the same things. One does the work of a secretary, another is a farmer, another a tailor, another a weaver, a builder, a shoemaker, a physician, and so forth. Thus, in order to acquire what is needed, we have some things from the trades which we practice, and we get other things from other people when we offer them our own things. So there has to be an exchange of products, and this is the meaning of the many vocations and the value of communities. Since this exchange of products is difficult, quote, money has been invented as a socially beneficial means whereby extra goods are disposed of and needs are fulfilled. End quote. Thus, The farmer gives what he has left over, and when he receives the price, he buys a house or some cloth. The shoemaker does the same. In this way, the lives of all of us are made up of relationships to one another, and for this reason, there are settlements and cities, and man is a social animal." End quote. In this homily, that of 48 of St. Gregory, we can see the value and the necessity of society and the need for it, as well as the meaning of money, of currency. Man is a social being, therefore he has established communities, neighborhoods, and cities. He cannot live only for himself. If the community does not prosper, the person loses his value. In these presuppositions, we can also see the value of philanthropy. Money is a means of exchange. Therefore, it cannot have greater value than the products. So money is said to be useful for the exchange of products. This means that it cannot and must not be made a value in itself. Therefore, the usurer breaks up society. In the light of these things, the saint advises lending to one another in cases of need, but not lending at inordinate rates of interest. He comments on this because in the society of Thessaloniki, at that time there were many usurers who capitalized on the poverty of the people. Moreover, such incidences provided motivation for the outburst and rebellion of the zealots beyond the political causes. The saint says that those who demand interest, especially at high rates, and do not lend money, the census and the silver, without such interest, are almost committing crimes and worse than sinners. He's referring to such Bible passages as the Old Testament, "Do not take interest for your money," and the place where the Old Testament praises the man who did not give money at interest. He also mentions Christ's words, where he accepts lending to people from whom there is no hope of being repaid. St. Gregory Palamas finds fault not with lending money, but with exacting high interest, especially when this is done by force. We are aware that need obliges the poor to borrow at high rates of interest, and this does not constitute the virtue of love. The usurer, however, not only does away with love, not only damages his soul, but also takes away the glory and the good repute of the state. These words of St. Gregory are characteristic. Quote, "Do you see how the usurer takes away not only the glory of his own soul, but also that of the state? Because by bringing upon it the accusation of inhumanity, he seriously wrongs the whole society." From Palamas, Homily 45. He regards this sin as a crime of inhumanity. He explains it by saying that while the usurer is a citizen of this city, and that all that he has acquired from it, from society, through the people, nevertheless, he does not use it for them. Quote, "This is shown by the fact that he does not give money to those who have no money, while he lends to those who have a little, but so artfully that he takes away even the little money which they have. The money lender does everything to get richer, not in money but in sins, destroying both the wealth and the soul of the lender. As a result, the saint says that the interest of the moneylenders is the offspring of vipers which lurk in the bosoms of the greedy. If the interest is the offspring of vipers, the idea of keeping the money and not lending it, because it is not allowed to charge interest, is the mother of vipers." Again, Homily 45. By these words, the saint wants to show that those who have money should lend what they have acquired, since they live in society without taking interest. All these things show the sociality of money. In fact, it does not belong to the possessor, but to society. And in fact, when society does not go well, when there is war, then money loses its value. So it is said that for this reason, money is useful for the social life, and that it is a social and not personal commodity. F. This leads us directly to the subject of wealth and the wealthy, which constantly occupied at that time his flock at Thessaloniki. The uprising of the zealots had just taken place, and the zealots must have been speaking about these subjects. St. Gregory was looking at the subject from within the theology of the Church. In fact, the way in which the Church confronts all problems, social, political, and so forth, is different from the way in which other man-centered or anthropocentric and humanistic organizations confront them. Analyzing Christ's parable about the rich man and Lazarus, and the fact that the rich man from his place of torment saw Lazarus in Abraham's bosom, he says that since in this parable Christ showed the rich man who was not saved, then he showed the rich man who was saved, and this is Abraham. Of course, he does not call him rich, since Abraham preferred virtue to wealth. The rich man of the gospel did not lose his salvation by being rich, but by self-indulgence, lack of compassion, and hating strangers. Although Abraham was rich, he was saved because he preferred virtue. St. Gregory writes clearly, quote, "For Abraham was rich, but also through his love for God and his compassion and love for the stranger, he not only was saved, but also became a place for the saved." End quote. And this is seen from the fact that Lazarus, after he died, was taken to Abraham's bosom, which is the place of the living, or the dwelling of those who rejoice eternally, the place of eternal possessions. For more, see PALAMAS Homily 48. To continue, I began by speaking of the rich man from this passage because I want to show that the saints of the Church are not Manichaeans, nor, of course, idolaters. That is to say, they do not refuse material possessions or idolize them. They regard them as gifts of God. In the Holy Orthodox tradition, it is seen clearly that the whole world is God's creation. Man is simply an administrator because he needs these things in order to be sustained. But since all men are children of God, all men have equal rights to nature, just as all the children of the family share alike in the distribution of their father's property. The same is true of creation. The problem comes when a person appropriates the material goods to himself, when he acquires them by dishonorable means at the public expense, and when he does not manage them well. Abraham was rich, but with hospitality, and in general with love, he also made others sharers of his wealth. When a person is devout but not charitable, he is condemned. St. Gregory emphasizes that the rich man in Hades called God the father of Abraham. This shows that he had not been punished for impiety, because he was of the race of the pious, but for his lack of compassion. In speaking against the rich, St. Gregory, pastor and healer that he was essentially curing the ordinary people and the rich. His aim was not just to reproach anyone, especially for demagogic reasons. He was rather interested in the salvation of the poor and the rich. He said, quote, "But if someone is well-to-do or famous or a ruler, let him not worry. They should not grieve, for they too, by the grace of God, cut off the tendency toward the worse, acquire virtues, righteous dealings, prudence, put a stop to the evil of others, and lead them to obedience to the Church of Christ." St. Gregory does sociology not by revolution, but by resurrection. He does not rebel and he does not reproach people, because he realizes that every rebellion creates greater problems, but he cures people. He restores people to their former glory and honor. St. Gregory is not a utopian and visionary, unrealist and dreamer, but rather he stresses the fact that the leaders, the wealthy, the wise, and so forth, need to exercise more force and effort in order to be saved. In speaking of wealth, he examines the causes and motives for a person's actions. Everything should happen from a pure heart. The rich are reproached on the one hand for not sharing what they have, and on the other hand for enriching themselves by plunder. So wealth through injustice and through not sharing are causes for reproach and lead the rich man to eternal condemnation. In speaking of Christ's parable about the foolish rich man, he makes significant observations showing the reason for the condemnation of rich people, as well as the broader meaning of injustice. The foolish rich man, as is seen in this parable, did not acquire his wealth unjustly. He did not wrong anyone. It was simply that that place was more productive. It bore more fruits. Yet he was worthy of death because he did not make any use of his wealth. He did not make good use of the abundance which God gave, and he did not gain godly wealth by passing it on. Here we see that God bestowed his grace for fruitfulness, because the fruits were fruits of God's love. The appropriation of these goods was a great sin. There should have been a good administrator. The punishment of those who acquire wealth by plunder will be much greater, especially if the plunder is taken from poor people. This category includes not only those who are our leaders, but also the men of the marketplace. And the leaders have their share of responsibility, but so do the men of the marketplace. Quote, "For how many things harmful to the buyers are contrived by our tavern keepers and the other tradesmen who, when they can, do not make right use of weights or measures." Clearly here the saint is referring to the enrichment of the merchants who do all they can, even cheating the customers when weighing the goods. So the problem is not only in the rich and the leaders, but also in the merchants who do everything to try to get rich. One of the basic causes of evil enrichment is the passion of the love of money. St. Gregory looks at this problem not only in its outward social aspect, but he goes into it more deeply. Moreover, social problems in their depths are human and personal. The love of money pushes people to get rich by injustices and to keep the wealth for themselves. The passion of the love of money is insatiable. The lover of money is never satisfied, even if he possesses many material goods. St. Gregory makes an excellent observation. The more the love of money is satisfied, the more the search for material goods increases and the shortage increases. Nor could the whole world be sufficient for a greedy and power-loving person. And since the greedy and ambitious are many, but there is just one world, how can any one of them find satisfaction for his own desire? And apart from his being unsatisfied, the love of money darkens a person's soul. All the passions related to it separate a person from God. They deaden his soul and bury it with gold and silver earth. He says that when the earth falls on dead bodies, it encloses their foul smell. When, however, the gold and silver of earth are put into the noose of those who possess much, it makes them more foul-smelling, so that the bad odor, it reaches heaven and turns away God's mercy and care. Homily 44. The love of money leads a person to the precipice, the abyss. Frugality and possessing little are wings which carry us high in the heavens. But we do not prefer them. Rather, we bind ourselves under the weights of the love of money which carry us down by desire or even by the pursuit of money, or as many rich possessions as possible, with the result that we fall into the abyss. Always curing, the saint is not satisfied just to make us aware of the passion of the love of money and its consequences for man's soul, but he proceeds to the cure. The thought of wealth, having many possessions, must be crucified because it is carnal and separates man from the crucified Christ. The crucifixion of the thought takes place when one hopes in Christ, who is the giver and nourisher of all, when one withdraws from any income which comes from injustice, when one uses well every acquisition fairly gained, also providing for those who are without. In this way we lift the thought of the love of money to the level of the cross. The passion of greed is inseparably connected with the passion of the love of money. These are passions which bring greater disaster to man. In order to show this, he refers to many deaths which were taking place then in Thessaloniki, precisely from the scourge which we are suffering. Gluttony in the body spoils the body. When one of the body's elements, such as the blood, is gluttonous, as you see in those who are dying, it brings death. In fact, when the blood remains in the heart, when the heart keeps all the blood to itself and does not channel it to the whole of the body, then even the heart itself is destroyed. Just the same thing happens with gluttony in the soul. Gluttony, quote, damages and kills the soul, driving out of it the grace of God, which is a more divine life. Gluttony not only murders a person's soul, but it also creates more social problems. In his effort to acquire many things, the glutton is a fire that consumes his fellow men. He creates many social anomalies. No sin is personal, but it also has social and universal dimensions. Citing examples from the society of his time, St. Gregory says that the fire of gluttony is coming almost everywhere, quote, in the public taxes, the common markets, the farm produce, merchandise. Then he says that, unfortunately, gluttony has also entered the homes of the clergy, making us and the feast days not feasts, quote, by the ridiculous and false mania which most people show for profit and vainglory. Here, too, the saint is not satisfied to make a dry and superficial reproach, because this will not lead to good results, but he proceeds to the curing of man from the passion of gluttony, recommending the appropriate methods. People must see that material goods are gifts of God and thank the donor, giving him thanks through works. Just as God heard your wish, he says, and satisfied your desire by the productiveness of the earth and so forth, so also you should come and listen and learn his will and obey and do it, so that you may have him as benefactor for the good things to come. Man should have his nous fixed more on eternal goods. But if his needs force him to be interested in material things as well, then he must take care to acquire them fairly, without injustices and plunderings, and to place them in a social framework, applying love. For those who get rich unfairly, the chief publican Zacchaeus should be an example. Quote, any publican or chief publican who is getting rich by his work in a wrong way and collecting unfairly, let him imitate the way to salvation of the chief publican, and repay and give out in a good way what he has hoarded in a bad way. G. The social message of St. Gregory Palamas, occasioned by the combats and the various events, were not directed only to a sociological analysis of the problems, but went on, as we've seen, to the cure as well. Thus he's not just satisfied to locate the topics related to wealth, but goes on to the cure of the poor. Both the rich and the poor are members of the church, so all need curing. The passions of the love of money and greed can exist among both rich and poor. The rich satisfy themselves through the possession of material goods and the desire to increase them, while the poor conserve them with the desire of possession in the future. Thus these passions do not make distinctions, but they develop in all people. St. Gregory, very revealingly, but also with the gift of words, represents the condition of the poor of his time. We are well aware that the uprising of the zealots, who exploited these social anomalies and the oppressions of the poor, had taken place previously. St. Gregory analyzes this whole social tragedy. He says that almost all of us treat our fellow men as strangers and enemies. Quote, alas, what I suffer, how am I to recite the public and common calamity? All were oppressing those beneath them. He writes again, alas, almost the whole world became a prey to our fight against one another. End quote. Even if for a little while some peace prevails, then those in power increase further the coercion against the poor, imposing heavier taxes upon the workers. Then the saint asks, quote, what soldier now is satisfied with his pay? What leader does not take pride in plunder? But the dog keepers and the swineherds, like wild and bloodthirsty dogs, scatter the lives of the defenseless people. Continuing this analysis, he says that the poor, since they cannot endure the merciless and misanthropic behavior of the tax collectors and the subsequent violence and injustice of those having greater power, are crying out against all the leaders and their fellow workers, the soldiers, and their servants. Indeed, as he says now, quote, the stream of injustice which is being poured out has reached even as far as the monks. And quote from Homily 62. These words of the saint are very realistic and revolutionary. All who maintain that the saint was on the side of the aristocrats and against the people are mistaken. All who slander the saint by asserting that the zealots turned against St. Gregory because of his ideas are also mistaken. Here it is shown that he is a spiritual father, a spiritual physician, who does not hesitate to perform an operation on every unhealthy member of society. But it is not enough only to become aware of the fact of injustice to the poor. He is not interested in exciting the revolutionary mania of the oppressed classes of society, but he is seeking the cure. In order to cure the social anomaly of injustice, he says what needs to be said to the wealthy, who are factors in this very anomaly. However, he must also cure the bitterness of those who have been wronged and the poor. He is well aware that a heart which is wounded and feels embittered is lame, because it cannot receive the Holy Spirit. Poverty is not an impediment to virtue in the knowledge of the mysteries of the Spirit and the divine sayings. In order to show this, Christ chose his disciples not from the wise and cultured, nor from the rich and the famous, but from the fishermen and tent makers and the poor and the unlettered. Thus he points out to every one that in order to be saved and to know the mysteries of the Spirit, quote, neither poverty nor lack of training nor lowness nor any other such things are a hindrance. So even the poorest, lowest, and untrained person, if he wishes, not only can learn the divine teaching, but by divine grace can even become a teacher. Among the sermons of St. Gregory Palamas, there is an astonishing homily and personal reference, which shows the great compassion that he had for those in need and suffering. Speaking of the passage about the judgment to come, and referring to Christ's words about eternal condemnation, he says of those who did not help Christ's brothers, quote, hear and be glad, all of you who are poor and needy, for according to this you are brothers of God. He advises them further, if they are low and poor against their will, to win the good for themselves voluntarily by patience and thanksgiving. Then he turns to the wealthy to advise them to acquire blessed poverty. All who despise the brothers of Christ and do not offer to the poor what they need, that is to say, food, shelter, clothing, care, ought to listen and groan. And then he is to say a surprising thing, quote, rather, let us hear and groan, for I myself too, who stand before you saying these things, am reproved by my conscience for not being entirely without passion, for I am filled and clothed, while many shiver and are in want. End quote. From Palamas homily number 4. These words are surprising because St. Gregory is confessing that he is blamed by his conscience because he is wearing clothing and is not cold, and because he has his daily nourishment. This shows amazing sensitivity, great love, understanding of the difficulties of others, but also his complete shedding of possessions. He speaks in the first person plural, quote, rather, let us hear and groan. In saying these things about himself, the saint does not mean that he himself had many goods. This appears from what he just says, then, that those are much more worthy of sorrow who have more goods than their daily needs require, and those who, while they are assigned to serve and love their neighbor, regard them as dust. He indicates that he himself was reproached by his conscience simply because he had food to eat every day and had something to wear. Essentially, in saying this, he shows his inner sensitivity, but also the fact that he is looking at himself in the midst of his poor brothers. Speaking of poverty, he calls it a blessing, but also salvation. Therefore, whoever are poor essentially should thank God. In saying this, he wants to cure the indignation of the poor against the rich. Quote, if anyone is poor because he was a victim of plunder or for any other reason, let him be grateful, for he has saving poverty. Rather, let him win his salvation by giving thanks for it. End quote. Homily 61. All who lack the necessary things should grow rich in their patience and thanks to God. This is said because he realizes that there is bodily poverty, and there's also spiritual poverty, which is blessed by God and is the cause of many good things. H. The social problems which the saint confronted refer to other subjects as well. One is the food for our maintenance. Realizing that many people occupy themselves with excess in eating and drinking, St. Gregory analyzes the meaning of food for the human organism. After Adam's fall, we put on the garments of mortality and decay, and therefore food is necessary for the human organism. Quote, since we are perishable, it is necessary to nourish ourselves. Part of the food which we eat, which comes into the organism, is kept by nature for its own maintenance and constitution. The rest is discarded. So being mortal men, we, quote, feed ourselves daily because of our inborn love of life. Homily 41. To be sure, he's using this example for another situation, and he draws the appropriate conclusions. But in the end, he is showing the value and importance of food for the mortal human organism. As we saw in another chapter, the saint recommends regular eating with fasting. The value of the fast in this sense is very great. Quote, but let there also be moderate eating, for thus fasting moderately and eating moderately, you will not be far behind those who undernourish themselves. End quote. Since the impression existed that fasting leads a person to wasting away, the saint says that the opposite is the case. That is to say, fasting is the mother of health, while eating to satiety is the cause of many illnesses. Quote, for satiety gives birth to gout and headaches and other illnesses, while fasting is the mother of health, end quote. From Palamas homily number 9. To continue, overeating also points to a theological and social problem. The theological one is that we think that food gives us life, and we do not know that God is the giver and maintainer of life. The uncreated grace of God keeps us alive through foods. But if a man reaches the end of his life, no matter how much food he receives, it does him no good at all. The social problem is that the desire for excessive food and the consumption of many products is connected with other passions, which create anomalies in society. Many murders, wrongs, disputes, extortions, and so forth begin with overeating and drinking. Another social topic which St. Gregory Palamas takes up in his sermons is that of work. Man should work, and the worker is praised in Holy Scripture. His work should be valuable and blessed by God. Unfortunately, many sins too are connected with work. Excessive work deadens man's nous and makes him turn to the creation and not to God. It leads him far from God and the Church. I shall mention 2 examples from the teaching of St. Gregory Palamas. One is related to combining work with prayer. A person should pray while working and not forget God. During the harvesting, he should think of God's harvest, which will take place in the second coming. St. Gregory asks, quote, what person who harvests the soulless ears of corn, or pays others to harvest, and who selects the fruits, or buys them from the one who selects them and gathers them into the storehouse, keeps in mind the harvest which is to come. If our thought is only on earthly things, then we are no different from any of the heathens, because the mark of the heathens is that they occupy themselves with earthly cares, with all the power of soul and body. Then he says that God constructed our nature in such a way that our thought can be on other matters, even if our body's working and moving. God did this so that we might do suitable work with our body and, looking toward God with our soul, seek the things of heaven from him at the same time. The person who has his soul turned toward God will not suffer any harm, even as to the requirements of his body. It is obvious that St. Gregory Palamas is referring here to the subject of prayer, an unceasing mindfulness of God, nipsis, who is able to be present in any situations. This unceasing recollection can be attained also by married people, workers in the world, because it's the natural state of man. Man was created in such a way that his body works and his soul is mindful of God. Therefore, noetic prayer is not something unnatural, but the most natural state, and a natural function of the psychosomatic existence of man. The other example is related to work and common worship. Even at that time during the harvesting of fruits, people had the habit of not attending church. St. Gregory wants to correct this disorder. He says that during the grape gathering, the church was empty. There was a serious lack of churchgoers, and there was almost none to make the supplications and prayers to God. It is true that these things meant that when the period of the grape harvest was over, when he saw the church filled with those assembled, of course this filled him with delight. He mentions it in order to make them see this and not to reproach them. Quote, and I say this to you now, not to blame you, but to bring you to your right mind. Employment in the vineyard should not give a person cause to withdrawal from God and the church. Rather, when this season approaches, he should be increasing the doxologies to him. People do not do well when during the harvest they decrease and neglect worship. In this way he finds opportunities to make observations about his listeners. Some people justify themselves for their absence from the church worship because of the harvesting. But, quote, before the grape gathering and after the grape gathering they do not rouse themselves for the Sunday matins doxologies either, end quote. Then during the worship, some of them give more attention to their conversations and not to the prayers. Their minds are on purchases more than on words, on the market sellers than on the God-inspired scriptures. In this way, quote, the oratory becomes a shop, and the house of prayer, a market, end quote. He comes to the point of emphasizing that unfortunately they talk during the worship, and one hears a buzzing like drones, so that they themselves do not hear, and they prevent others from hearing, end quote. For more on that, see Palamas homily number 51. Work should not be a cause for the nous to detach itself from God and for a person to detach himself from the worship of the church. A working person can pray and give thanks to God during his work. In this way, work becomes divine service. J. Another social phenomenon is the subject of authority and the leaders. St. Gregory is well aware that authority is a phenomenon of our fallen state, and therefore a society cannot exist without authority. The leaders are given by God to serve the citizens and not to subjugate them. To be sure, as we've seen in other sections, the leaders should behave rightly toward the people. They should not oppress or tyrannize them. They are servants of the people. But the citizens, when there are leaders who are interested in public affairs, should show respect and honor. However, the saint refers to the case of those people who run off to the leaders of the city, who make great efforts for them, and do not give due respect to the kings who are given by God, and they are not humbled by the powerful hand of God. These men are disobedient to the church and to the protectors of the church, who are concerned for them and pray for every good for them. We must say that the saint is speaking here about the authority which is given by God and about the leaders who work for the good of the people. Likewise, he is speaking of those who react against any authority when they do not wish to submit to it. And by saying this, he is emphasizing the necessity of authority on the one hand, and on the other hand, that the leaders must direct the people in accordance with God's will. He refers to St. Demetrios of Thessaloniki and says that the distinctions which St. Demetrios received from the earthly king, namely a military uniform, the ring on his finger, and the consular epaulets which the martyr wore, quote, I regard as symbols of the true teaching and advisory office mystically given by the true king. From homily 49. Thus in the Christian, in the saint, the authority and all the symbols become a source of wonder-working and blessing. Quote, that is why the divine grace of God works wonders abundantly through them later. Certainly, the leaders should honor and respect both God and the saints. The leaders should respect the holy tradition of the people. St. Gregory is referring to the situation of his time in which the emperors took part in festive demonstrations for the great martyr Demetrios, and who were, quote, present with us praising the good qualities of the martyr. It is not enough to be simply a formal presence, but the kings, in order to be worthy of the people and of the honor and respect of the people, should be adorned more with devoutness than with kingship, end quote. Again, Palamas homily 49. To conclude this section, the social teaching of St. Gregory extends into many fields and goes into many analyses. In this section, I have presented the most indicative and essential ones. What I wanted chiefly to underline is that the social teaching of St. Gregory is a fruit and result of his sobriety, his holiness, his love of God, and his love of man. He did not study sociology in any university. He was not a dry and theoretical sociologist, but his sociology was result of personal experience, revelation of God, and also of pastoral service. Could such a saint ever be regarded as a supporter of the rich, the well-born, and the aristocrats? Certainly not. In the same way, he could not support the anarchy demonstrations of the people, the acts of violence, the murders, riots, when indeed the people were outside the spirit of Romanness. We should sometime acknowledge that and make it our experience. Sociology is a way of life, not theories and social systems. Chapter 8 continued his social teaching, a dimension of the monastic life. Concluding Section 6, Sociality and Monasticism. The social teaching of St. Gregory is an outcome of his ecclesiastical and monastic life, as he lived it in Constantinople and on the Holy Mountain. We shall look precisely at this in this section because it is in the Orthodox monasteries that social life is lived within purity of heart and the participation of the Holy Spirit. We can say that to have no property and ownership in common apart from the Holy Spirit is utopia, since such a condition is essentially an experience of the life before the fall. In the Orthodox monasteries, the monks are cured by the entire life within which the Orthodox Church has lived and continues to live, and then they become sharing, truly loving others and behaving in a humane and right way. We shall look, however, at what are the elements which shape the monastic and the Hagioritic life, as St. Gregory Palamas lived them, and as we see them to this day. A. Philanthropy is connected with the love of God. These two are results and sequels of a person's shedding of selfishness. The more we are impeded by individualism and egoism, the more we are unable to develop right social relationships. Every Orthodox monk struggles to be saved by living in the Church and not in order to save the Church, as we see it in Western monasticism. Thus, the monasteries function more as hospitals, which cure a man and lead him to the life before the fall. We know well that the monastic life begins with renunciation and obedience. In the beginning, the monks give up material goods, their possessions, and other social relations, not out of hate and scorn, but in order to be able to be submissive for the purpose of being cured. Just as one who is physically ill abandons the attractions of the world in order to enter hospital, not out of scorn for the world, but to be cured and to enjoy the world and God's good gifts as a result, the same is true of the monk. Therefore, the Orthodox monastic gives up possessions with the aim of being purified and attaining illumination of his nous. With the help of his spiritual father, he cleanses his heart from passions, which are the chief source of the anomalies in society. He cures his illness by acquiring unselfish love. When he attains illumination of the nous, he is living the life of Adam in paradise before the fall, and then, if God wills, he also attains to the vision of God. Thus he acquires love for God and for man. He loves what God loves, and then his attitude toward material goods in the world are mature and integrated. In all of creation he sees the principles of beings, that is to say, the uncreated energy of God. Thus the world is given another meaning, another purpose. St. Isaac the Syrian would say that in this situation, man acquires other eyes. This is the path that St. Gregory Palamas followed. As we saw, he went to the holy mountain and prayed for the darkness of his soul to be enlightened. He lived without possessions, with common ownership, love of God and love of man at the greatest depth. He always loved what God loved. That is why in everything his behavior was hesychistic. He lived in the world, found himself in many and difficult circumstances, without his nous becoming disoriented. He confronted heresy, civil war, the zealots. He shepherded the people of Thessaloniki, while his nous was constantly dedicated to God. We see this clearly in all his conduct and all his work. We see the same thing in the contemporary true Hagiorites. They are real men, and they confront all the real problems of life. Near them we find rest and consolation. Personally, on the Holy Mountain, and especially in the remote places, in the desert of the Holy Mountain, I have found more true social life, greater love than in any ordinary society of men. They live far from the world, but they have a true ethos, a love fulfilled. B. The construction of the holy monasteries of the Holy Mountain show the ethos of the Hagiorite monk. In the center of the holy monastery is the principal church, and at the center of the skeet is the church. It is there that the gatherings for worship, for the vigils, and so forth take place. Around the church are the simple and humble cells of the monks, just as the cells in the skeets where the escorts or isolated monks stay. The theological meaning of this arrangement is that they want to have the Word of God, the Logos, at the center of their life. Everything else receives its meaning and value from this center. Common ownership by the monks is a function of the relationship with God, who is the center of life. This is seen also in the skeets of the Holy Mountain. The way in which they are organized resembles more the orthodox organization of our society. Our societies were meant to have this life as their prototype. The center would have to be the church and the houses connected with it liturgically, pastorally, and so forth. At that time, our life would have had a meaning. In older times, our villages and small communities were organized in somewhat this way. In such communities, people find meaning. They develop sound and full social relations. Love is lived as a personal fact. There is sharing in joy and sharing in sorrow. St. Gregory lived this way very much on the Holy Mountain. Both in the desert and in the monasteries he lived true community. And then he made it a teaching. If we read carefully the homilies which he spoke to his flock in Thessaloniki, we will find out that they were founded on the way of life of Mount Athos. When he spoke of love, of man's relationship to God, of charity, common ownership, prayer during work, and so forth, he certainly had in mind the monastic way of life, which can also be lived by married people. C. The relationship of church and trapeza or dining hall of the monastery shows the ceremony and the holy order of material goods. The trapeza in the holy monastery is opposite the holy church, the main church. Apart from its liturgical needs, the holy monastery also shows a serious theological reason. Man does not consist of a soul alone, but also of a body which must be nourished. Nourishment is necessary for the human organism. The divine liturgy precedes, and the trapeza follows. Thus, the basic hierarchical needs of human life are satisfied. The service of the trapeza shows respect for the whole of human life. The monks enter the trapeza exactly as they enter the church. They have the same dress, and especially on feast days or Sundays, they enter processionally, with the holy icon, the incense, the candles, chanting the introit of the feast or the day. During the meal there is reading, so that even the nous is set upon God and does not attach itself to the food. The body and soul are nourished. At the end of the trapeza, the abbot blesses the monks and the lay people present. All who take an active part in the trapeza, the cook and the reader, ask the forgiveness of all for any failures. And the procession is led to the Holy Church, where the prayer takes place, and then the feast or the celebration is complete. St. Gregory, he lived all these things on the Holy Mountain, and thus understood and practiced their hierarchies and their functioning. And today, this way amazes us. It counsels a way of life and leads us on this way. We see the relationship which material goods can have with our life. D. The ministries are essential for an organized society. In the monasteries, there are all the ministries, because the monastery is an organized society. There is the ministry of the church, the scribe, the treasurer, the trapezaris, the gardener, the mule taker, the shoemaker, the tailor, the guest master, the baker, and so forth. Everything is done with the blessing of the hierondo, the abbot, and with prayer. Before beginning his service, the monk will receive a blessing, and will do it with a pure nous, praying to God. The ministries are interchanging. Every time it is the abbot who appoints the ministry of the brother, or will give him a new one, or leave him the old one. In some monasteries, there is a formality for all the brothers to go through as many ministries as possible in order to acquire with the others a sense of the community of the holy monastery as well. It may be that the ministries or diaconimos may be related to the abilities of the monk, and they may not be. It is possible for a theologian to work as a gardener. Everything happens according to God and in conformity with the needs of the holy monastery and the discrimination of the abbot, who is father. The way of organizing the ministries shows how society too can function. Within these frames, we can also see the teaching of St. Gregory Palamas about work and occupation. In some cases where one monk is not enough to carry on the work, there is a pangenia, where all the monks help. It is said that in the old time, when they had to unload a ship, the first sack had to be carried by the abbot. So work was not presented as a chore, but as a service. It was done with obedience, love, and freedom. These things constitute the real meaning of the work. E. For the administration of a monastery there is a hierarchy. Each monk can neither do what he wants, nor be despotically ascetic. There must be administration, but it must be carried out with love and charity. There is the Hierotheos, the assembly of the elders and administrators, whose chairman is the abbot and the assembly of all the brotherhood. The administration is identified with the spiritual supervision of the monastery and the monks. The abbot is the one who deals with all the problems of the monastery, but at the same time, he is also the spiritual father who guides them in the spiritual life so that they may become inwardly purified and arrive at deification by grace. Thus, the administration is not separated from the spiritual fatherhood. It is in this light that St. Gregory saw the organizing of the community and the relationships of the inhabitants with the leaders, and conversely. The leaders must direct the people sacrificially, canonically, according to the example of Christ, who loved and sacrificed himself for the sheep. And the people should not oppose, but obey when the leaders who recommend this are not going against the will of God. These relationships between leaders and led are regulated by love, love of God and love of man. F. In the holy monasteries, hospitality is practiced to a great depth as well. It is impossible for there to be a monastery on the holy mountain which is not hospitable. The same is true of all Orthodox monasteries. Hospitality is holy and is given freely. The worshipper is received with much love. Sacrifices are made in order that his stay at the monastery may be comfortable. He is met as a brother of Christ and as a member of his body. They receive him into the temple and share the food with him. Everything is common. And for the worshippers, they console him with charity and a comforting word. They send him on his way with love and prayer. The guest is holy, a brother of Christ. They do not give him teaching, but they go with him and give him human comfort, but divine as well. And this should point the way of hospitality in human societies. Where there is the virtue of hospitality, it manifests the existence of charity and love of God, and therefore there is God's blessing. The conclusion is that the social teaching of St. Gregory Palamas is a dimension of the Hagioritic life, the life which he lived in the monasteries of the Holy Mountain, which in reality is the love and the way of the Holy Gospel, the ecclesiastical life. He acquired an ethos, the ethos of the Hagiorite monk, and so he was genuine. He faced all the topics and problems soundly, authentically, and truly. In the Orthodox Church, we have a great treasure. It is the monasteries and the Holy Mountain, the garden of the Virgin Mary. There, the cenobitic and self-emptying canonic way of life is still being lived. The existence of the monastery shows that the living Orthodox Greek tradition in our time has not been lost. The holy monasteries of the Holy Mountain are the mirror of the Orthodox tradition with all its powerful character. Within the Orthodox monasteries, we can live true theology and true society in purity of heart. There we understand what the organization of society means. Our Orthodox monasteries gives us also the model of a true life, the prototype of the organization of our societies and families. End of chapter 8.